Today I'm going to make a mess of this Cybermastiff, but still come out with something I'm pretty pleased with. I've been painting Necromunda for about 9 months now, and I've started this channel in the hopes that I might actually see some progress. So join me as I rescue this model from myself. It all started pretty well. I had it assembled and based with Mechanicus Standard Grey. I'd based the rest of the set in this. I could have saved myself a step here by doing it in Abaddon Black, but never mind, it's not a big issue. I'm doing my first coat here to represent the fur as it's the largest surface area. One thing I learned early on is that this is the best place to start, as this is where you'll probably make the most mistakes, which you can come and clear up later. And as you can see, this bit went pretty smooth. Then I moved on to Ironbreaker. I chose this because the House of Warlock are the House of Iron after all, and it's a pretty good metallic base for the head and for the legs, as well as for the lead. I also used it for the tail and for the protruding spines out of the back. So far, so good. The next step was to use Rhinox hide for the collar. Next I used Mephiston red. I used this for the mouth and for where the metallic parts met the flesh. This is where I started messing up with my brush strokes, going over some of the spines and over some of the black I'd already painted. I was pretty confident I could come back later and cover it over, so I moved on to Mournfang brown. With that I was going to bring out the musculature in the animal and add a bit more contrast for the fur. Then I did a bit of experimentation with Warplock bronze. My idea with this was to water it down and create a wash to have a bit of contrast on the metallic parts of the legs and the head, but it didn't go the way that I planned. Trying not to panic, I moved on to this white from Vallejo. I use this for the teeth as I feel it just paints better than white scar. That being said, I went on and used that next. I wanted the red to stand out more. My thinking here was to use it as an undercoat and then go back over it again, which I did with a mixture of blue, purple and red, but then I felt the result stood out too much. While having a quiet little panic about that and letting it dry, I went back to Mournfang for the tail. After that I went back to Ironbreaker to touch up the spines that I'd gone over a bit with my mix. Then I watered it down and went back over the legs to try and dull out some of that bronze. I was a lot happier with the legs after I did this, and that's when I had my revelation. I could just go back and cover up my mistakes. With a bit of patience and perseverance I could bring back this model. So with Mephiston I went back into those wound areas I was struggling with and went back over them, as well as tidying some of the black areas with the Abaddon. Then I gave the Mournfang areas a second coat. I had an idea then for the antenna, and I really wanted to pick it out at the top like it was receiving a signal, so I went in with a bit of red and then a bit of white. Then I moved on to Stormhove Silver, and I was going to use that to pick out some of the lines on the metallic edges. I wanted to use it to make a bit of contrast to make it look like some of these metal surfaces were catching the light. Then I grabbed some Evil Sun Scarlet and I washed this down and went over some of the red areas again really carefully, trying to pick them out and trying to make them look a little bit red and create a bit of contrast. Then I decided to go back to the tail with a bit of Rhinox hide to try and pick out some of the layering in that tail. Then with Abaddon Black I went back to the legs. Again with Mournfang I went back to the collar around the edges to try and pick it out to make it look worn. Then I used what's become one of my favourite tools, Nuln Oil. This really gets into some of those hard to reach recesses, so I went over the lead with that, as well as the metallic head to try and bring out some of that detailing. Next I moved on to Retributor armour. With this I was going to pick out some of the joints and bolts on the legs to make them stand out more. That's when I had the idea to wash it out a bit more and use it in place of the Warblock I'd used earlier to bring out a bit more contrast in those legs. And with those final touches I was actually really happy with where the model had ended up. With the model done it was time to do the base. I moved on to Runefang Steel for the metallic areas. After that I used some Abaddon Black to try and get into those recesses. Then I moved on to Retributor armour, which is becoming one of my favourite colours, especially when using it for contrasting metallic areas. Then I used Avalanche Sunset to bring out the warning stripes I'd set up earlier with the Abaddon Black. And then it was back to Nuln Oil to try and dirty it up a little. Finally I went over it with some Agrax Earth shade again to try and dirty it up. And here it is, the finished model. It's not perfect and I made some mistakes, but what I learned is with some patience and perseverance you can go back in and cover these up. I think the thing to remember is to enjoy the process. It's not a sprint. Mistakes can and will happen, but doesn't mean you can't fix them. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to catch you on the next one.